Hey, welcome to this episode of the Contractor Commute. My name is Drew, here with Ben, and we are in a series on creating accurate estimates, which at service level could sound somewhat dry and boring, but creating accurate estimates, we know, is really, it's the foundation of being profitable. And so while writing an estimate might not be fun and exciting, making money is fun and exciting, and is a lot of fun. So part of being profitable, making money up front, it's how do you bid and estimate up front, which is why we're doing this series.
Absolutely. And it's one area where I've had a lot of fun, a lot of mistakes, a lot of learning over the years. And the best kind of learning is when we can learn from somebody else's mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about, we're going to talk more in depth about different parts of the estimate process, which is part of what we do here at ConGenius. But up front, we're going to talk about using the right pricing model. And so there's different ways and different models you can use for pricing your jobs. We've talked to a lot of contractors here, and some people a lot of times what happens is guys just take whatever model they learned, right? So whoever they learned from or however they got into the business, they just take a model and stick with it. Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk through, there's kind of three core ones that kind of are industry terms. And so those would be, a time and materials would be one. Second one would be fixed price. The third one would be cost plus. So we're going to break down those three, kind of talk through pros and cons, pitfalls of each. And just tips to make each model successful. So you got to pick one, and you might use multiple too. I think guys sometimes, depending on the job, would use a different model as well.
Yeah, when we're prepping for the show, Drew, you brought up a project you had got an estimate on for a bathroom, and you had brought back some of those types of things that I either had been a part of, either getting a subcontractor bid on a project for an element of it, or projects that I've had done on my own house or things like that. And you see this wide range of values that you get back, even formats and specifications of what's being done. I mean, it can range so wildly from the absurdly cheap to the stupid expensive.
Yeah.
And somewhere in there's some truth. And it's not always readily apparent on the sheet of paper you get back.
Yeah, I think estimates can sometimes be an art more than a science. I mean, there's like facts and figures involved with it. But yeah, I mean, most of us have gotten a bid for a job on your house. And, bids and estimates come back with a wide variance. Well, who's right?
Right.
Who got it right?
Yeah. So I think some of the foundational aspect, even outside of the model, is really making sure we understand what's being done, which I think influences the model, or really how we price it, right? So if we're starting off with this whole idea of time and materials being the simplest model of how we would price a job, that is the idea that I charge $50 an hour for my services. And if I need materials, I'm going to go to the store and buy them, and I'm going to send you a bill for the materials and charge you for my time. So obviously simple, easy to put out the door, but obviously it's got some problems too. Can be overused, and also you limit your ability to really scale with that model, because not everybody, if you're really good and really fast, the customer doesn't necessarily see that. They're going to hold you, well, that other guy can do it for $20 an hour and you're 50.
Yeah.
So you can really create a ceiling that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
You're really good. You have a ton of experience. You could be getting done in 1 hour what another guy takes 3 hours to do.
Yeah.
And so,
and you're probably not charging 3 times what that guy is charging.
Right.
As you proceed in your skill and aptitude and craftsmanship.
Yep.
You're probably not charging 3 times. So
right.
If we talk through the 3 models, one, time and materials, we're kind of talking about it now, but if we talk through just straight time and materials, I think you defined it well. It's like, hey, here's materials. I'm going to tell the customer what they cost, and my time. Those 2 things are going to be what this job costs. I think it could be very simple. It can be very beneficial in situations where, if a customer who doesn't know everything they want yet, they're going to say, hey, let's get started on the job. It's a bathroom model. And as they add what they want, you just get the materials and you bill for the time,
Right.
I think there's some pros and cons to that approach.
Yeah. And consumers are going to be a little hesitant in that model on bigger projects, particularly. It's one thing if you want your gate fixed or your fence repaired or something along those lines, because how long could it take? I mean, what's justifiable? If you spend over there 3 weeks fixing a gate, you got a problem. But if it's something simple like that, a guy bills you 5-6 hours, has a reputation, and you're saying, it's about fair, right? I mean, the guy was there, he worked hard, he got something done. Good. It's all fine and dandy. You got a 3 a 3-week long project and this guy shows up and starts billing you $50 an hour, you don't know if that's efficient time. You start the customer starts watching you in the truck when you're on a phone call with someone else. Is he billing me for that time? And was he here yesterday? And I was at the shop, working on something. They're I even had one time where somebody showed up at our shop. Are you guys really working on our shop? Yeah. I can go back to take a look. But nonetheless, you don't want that kind of pressure necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, because they start thinking like, hey, I'm charged. They start thinking I'm paying you per hour. Yeah. And they start doing the math, right?
It's the wrong mindset.
And they can start micromanaging you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Small projects might make sense where it's like, hey, this is just the time it's going to take. Handyman type stuff where it's, hey, this is, a less than a 1-day job type of thing. That stuff makes a lot of sense. If you're more of a service oriented world where you're billing per hour, that can make sense.
So if you're using this model, the pro tip is to make sure that you're setting the right wage rate.
Yeah.
If you want to take home if you're taking home $40 an hour, depending on how much you're working, you might be making $60,000 to $90,000 a year, at this $40 an hour bill rate, if that's what you took home. But your tools cost money.
Yeah.
Your truck costs money. There's fuel and all the rest of it. So you really want to start building a value proposition to your customer in a time and materials mindset where you account for the things that are intangible.
Yeah.
Fuel costs money. Getting to the job costs money. The tools cost money. Those things you kind of almost build this sort of trip charge type of thing on a time materials model where you're saying, just for being there, just for showing up, that might be $150 depending on your cost involved. And that's to feed your tools.
Yeah.
That's a cost to you.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to miss that in a time and materials billing model.
I think your ceiling is always there as well too. I mean, it's hard to scale that.
Yeah.
We talked to a guy recently and he was like, hey, I'm getting older. My body's I can't work as fast as I used to, or not willing to do as many things as I used to. If you don't change your rates or whatever, the ceiling is short. You'll never be able to earn more than what you're charging per hour. You're selling your time for money at a fixed rate, which has downsides. Yeah. To those things, we're talking about overhead, right? Like gas, all the other things. Are you actually billing for $50 of your actual time? Or in the customer's mind, it's just actual physical time at their house. There's a lot more that goes into it.
Right. You might be working on their project, researching specifications for something, researching some of the logistical aspects of managing a project that's unseen to the client.
Yep.
And so having a nice clear definition up front of saying, I'm going to bill you a certain number of hours just for managing the project of one other aspect of a time and materials job. But really, we start losing some of the motivations for using this model, right? Is there a better way? I mean, this works in some contexts. Something's undefined, something's hard to define. You're just getting started. This works great, right? I'm just going to bill. It's simple, to the point. The ceiling is not an issue yet, but there's time. But there might be a thing where you want to graduate to something that's a little bit more flexible. It's not capping your ceiling, that accounts for your overhead and takes, factors in the costs of all of these unseen aspects of a project. So I think it's a great place to start. And it's also a good thing to use as a part of your pricing for an occasional type of thing.
Yeah. I think if you're a new guy who's just started, one thing to keep in mind, we've talked to this guy too, who's like, hey, I just got started and I'm making $50 an hour. And it's like, well, but when you really factor in all the other costs associated with it, you're not making $50 an hour.
Right.
Some people are so underestimating their overhead that they're making like 20, $25 an hour or less in some scenarios.
Yeah.
And so the trick is, I think sometimes they think, well, I'm paying myself $50 an hour to do this job. That's good money. And at some point, maybe that's better than what you've made in the past. But don't trick yourself into believing that's what you're actually making,
right?
Because you're bringing home to your bank account, to your family, a lot less than $50 an hour. And if you don't do that math in advance, you will end up at the end of the year wondering why you're broke or wondering why ends aren't meeting, even though you think you're charging this high dollar amount. That might be more than you've ever made before. But again, to the new business owner, you got to think through all the details behind that to understand that big number isn't as big as it sounds when it comes to the end of the day and what's going on in your personal bank account.
And you need to educate your customer on what's going on there.
Right.
You charge $65 an hour. You're letting them know in that process of, seems high, but this is what I've got to cover. And there's some transparency involved in that as well. If you know where you're at, you're like, this is a fair wage. This is why I have to charge 65, the cost of doing business.
Customer feels
these things.
Customer feels like there's no hidden costs. It seems very upfront, transparent, easy, simple. But that simplicity can actually cost you quite a bit in the long run.
Yeah.
Let's get to Let's get to number 2. So number 1 is time and materials. We kind of talk through what that is, how it works. And again, in some scenarios, that is the best way to bill in certain jobs. But I think we would probably say that we would challenge most people, if that's all you do, to move beyond that into another model, which I think would probably be fixed price.
It's the most common way we build jobs. People want to know, what's it going to cost me? Everyone wants a bid, right? Yep. I mean, what's that bathroom remodel going to cost? What's the addition going to cost? What's my electrical work going to? I just had this thought too from the time of materials. I had somebody do a project for me, and he billed me $50 an hour. I was an electrician. It seemed high at the time, and this is a number of years ago. And here's the weakness with that model. Is a larger company. They had, not huge, but nonetheless, he billed that hourly rate for all the team members on that team. Mm-hmm. He was exceptional. His team, not so much.
Yeah.
So I get a bill $50 an hour for the kid working for him with 6 months of experience. And I'm thinking to myself, he screwed up this. He had spent 2 hours doing that. He should have done it for half an hour. It's a tough model to really convince your customer when you scale a business. I just want to point that out as kind of an example of the way I thought of it. I'm evaluating that kid. Mm-hmm. Was he worth the $50 an hour I got charged?
Yeah.
Even though this electrician knows that part of that $50 an hour went into all the other aspects of running a business. That's not how I think, and I should know better.
Right.
Because I've built a lot of things and I know the overhead component, but that's not what I'm thinking. So that's just, even from somebody that should know, even with the education aspect of it, all of our minds go there.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
You think I'm paying this kid that much money,
right?
So you can set yourself up for some customer dissatisfaction along
the
way.
So back to fixed price.
Okay. Time materials done. Fixed price. Number 2. Let's talk through fixed price. Again, I think this is the bid that most people are putting out there right now. And that is, I'm going to do this amount of work, and this is the price it's going to cost you, Mr. Customer, for me to remodel your bathroom, add that addition, do that deck, whatever. I think it's, there's some pros and cons to it. I think from a fixed price standpoint, from a selling a job standpoint, this is what most customers want. They want to know. They've all heard the horror story of the ballooning prices and unmet timelines, but they want to know you're going to do exactly these services for exactly this dollar amount. I think that's when a customer probably feels the most comfortable saying, yep, I'll sign on the line with that, especially the higher the price tag goes on a job. If you're doing, sub $10,000 work, then, it can be easier. But as soon as it starts getting higher, a customer wants to know you're not going to start sending me more and more bills as this thing goes. And I think fixed price is what a lot of customers want.
And it's been popularized by many people, as you pointed out, Drew. I mean, I was listening to a podcast, a guy that's talking about his last project that he had done. And, it was grossly over budget. And he could afford to pay it too. He was one of those guys that had plenty of money, but just the optics of constantly getting bills that were different from the original, it almost seems dishonest.
Yep.
We're going to come in at $350,000 for this high-end remodel, and it comes in at $600,000. It seems, wow, what a ripoff. Whereas if we started off at $600,000, that was exactly what we expected.
Right.
So there's an optic to that as well.
Yeah. It's setting an expectation and fulfilling it, which normally keeps a happy customer.
Yeah, so true.
And I think it's best for for a customer who's got an exact budget that can't be exceeded. Let's be real. Most families have budgets, and there's a budget they've got. Mm-hmm. And so if they can't exceed that number and you come in under that number, everyone's happy at the end of the day. So the pros are, I think it gives, homeowners confidence that the project's not going to exceed the budget unless there's, you're going to have a clause in there for change orders. If they change the scope midway through, then you've got to have the price. Yeah. It's easier to sell up front. Like, hey, this is what it's going to be. If that's an easier transaction up front to sell the job in that format, you have a clear scope, but there's definitely some challenges to fixed price as well.
Yeah, particularly when you don't have a lot of experience in a specific aspect of what you're bidding out. That's a danger point because you've not done it 50, 60, 100 times. And to really figure out other unseen things that I might be missing. So you put out a fixed price. I've been burned by this before. That's the third time we've done it. And we really don't know what that costs us. And then you find out, oh, man, we got hosed on that one particular line item because we don't have experience there.
Yeah.
So that's one danger.
Yeah. Yeah. We're talking to a contractor in recently, and he does fixed price. And, it's bid him a few times where it's like, hey, I said I was going to get this job done for $30,000. And then I realized halfway through I messed up. I didn't bill for something correctly. And in order for me to fulfill that, it was going to cost me an extra $6,000 to do it. Now I'm going to lose money on this job.
Yeah.
And so that's where, the time materials guy is sitting back laughing saying, that wouldn't have cost me.
Even if I only make $12 an hour after all my costs are paid, I may always make it.
Yeah. Time materials guy always makes money, you know? This guy, for the fixed cost, you're going to be able to sell bigger, more complicated jobs to a higher end clientele on a fixed price model, but you've got to get the estimate right. if you don't estimate, your cost, materials, or time correctly, you could lose money. And you've got a contract saying, I'm going to get it done.
Stay home and make more money on some of these projects.
And everyone who's done a fixed price job knows they've lost money on certain jobs.
And I think some of that comes down to there's this kind of hurried aspect of a fixed price model where you don't know if you're going to win all those jobs. You're competing against other guys. You don't know where you line up in the whole scope of range, I should say, of numbers coming back to that person.
Yeah.
So we're tempted to take a shortcut there, right? Where we're like, well, let's get that bid out the door, get that estimate out the door as fast as possible without really studying it. And we can miss line items on there that really bite us later. And we almost feel like the honest thing to do, if you're that guy that has been in this position before where the customer's saying, well, how did you not know that should be part of this type of project? It's hard to say, well, I mean, this one's different or whatever. When it's hard, when you're in that spot, you end up just eating it and say, well, yeah, you're probably right. Or whatever. It's tough to change order something that should have been as a part of the original. Whereas if you had the detail and said, this is the defined scope, and if something differs from that, and you have the conversation up front with people saying, this is what's included. There's nothing that's sort of, out there that would be expected, to be done as a part of this. Then I think you're in a much better spot to say, well, we came across rotten wood. We came across termite damage. It's going to be additional. And you got to hold your head high. You cannot eat those kinds of costs.
Right.
You've got to realize that is taking from your business unnecessarily when something differs from what you originally put out there as a fixed price.
Yeah. And I think there's, that comes into your contract and your communication up front is, do you have a methodology of communicating that in written form to your customer that's super clear and concise? So when that happens, it's not me versus you in an argument as a customer, but it's me and you looking back at the contract we agreed on, say, hey, this is what we agreed to. This is what we talked about before we started. This is what's happened. We found termites, so this is what it's going to be. And I think when that's clear up front and you did fixed price up front, then I think you're going back to that contract where I think a lot of guys, we were looking at a bid earlier today that I had for my bathroom. There was not a single clause that was in that. It was, here's what it's going to cost.
Yep.
That contractor was setting himself up for a conflict with me or a loss for him. If he found termites in my bathroom, or found water damage. Yeah.
And maybe the termites, you could talk like, who would have expected that there was hidden, all the rest of it. But then there's other things of what type of sink was he using? What type of shower faucet?
Yeah.
So he says, install shower faucet. You look at it saying, I wanted this $1,500 faucet. He's thinking he's looking at a $150 one.
Yeah.
And you've got, body spray and 2 hoses. And
and he had sent over a contract that was ready for me to sign with none of those clauses in there.
Yeah.
He's trying to do fixed price without doing specifics. He's setting himself up for significant problems. Yeah. So tips for managing it. If you are doing fixed price costing, you're going to set yourself up to have a better sales process. You're going to come across, you're probably going to have the ability to win you're going to win some solid high-end jobs doing that model. But the key to that, I think, is having a bulletproof proposal. What tips do you have on creating a proposal in a fixed price model that's going to win more jobs?
Well, first off, it's hard work. That depending on the scope of the project, you can spend a lot of time with that. Templates help with that. Software can help with that, like what we're building. I think a big part of this as well is making sure you have routine, sort of almost like a weekly checkpoint, where you go back to the original document and you start checking off what's been done. And I found this really enlightening, where you go back to the original document, you realize, because it's easy to just try to make people happy and try to keep them engaged with the process. And you could add stuff in unnecessarily, where if it's a weekly checkpoint, you can revisit some things and say, you know what, we actually had a conversation about this upgrade that we're doing next week, and that's not in the original bid that we sent to you.
Yeah.
And this is what we're thinking the cost will be for that. And you have to make sure change orders should never be discounted. It's not you're not helping yourself out in this fixed price model by saying, well, we'll throw that in or we'll give you half price all. No, it's full price plus.
Yeah.
Because there's an overhead aspect of changes.
Yeah.
That it's easy to miss.
Mm-hmm.
You go back to the office having to write all that up. Who's paying for that write up of that? Mm-hmm. You have to go source materials, sometimes change materials you had originally planned to use.
Mm-hmm.
You have to communicate to your teams what changed from the original proposal. You have to make sure it gets done right. You have to also make sure the customer's on board with that. There's a lot of time involved with that. And it's not fair to your company to just eating all of that.
Yeah.
And assume that just comes out of your overhead.
Yeah. It's every item should have, and every proposal has to have a percentage of markup and a percentage of profit margin. And they're not the same thing, which is probably a whole nother episode of what those are.
It's easy to miss those fixed costs of doing business, and then the variable ones as well as part of a project.
Yeah. So we talked through time and materials being one method. Second one is fixed price, which I think a lot of people are doing. But I think there's kind of this third one, which is we call cost plus in our world, which is kind of a hybrid of the two. It solves some of the problems of fixed price, but also presents its own opportunities as well. So for cost plus, you want to break down what is cost plus and how is it different than fixed price?
So let's talk about how it differs from time and materials first, because we're having the idea of in a time and materials scenario, my time's worth this, your material is going to be marked up by this. And at the end of the day, we have a framework, right? Cost plus is not a framework like time and materials. It is something where we have a single source of truth. We do have an estimated list of costs, but we have a clear delineation up front that those estimated costs are just that. They are our estimated costs. And if something changes, either the cost of materials, labor, or subcontracted expenses, equipment, etc., we're just going to bill that at what it costs us plus a certain markup. So it's a transparent pricing model, which seems awesome to the client because they have an opportunity to either save money or spend more money depending on what they choose.
Mm-hmm.
They're choosing some Italian marble at $70 a square foot. Well, that's going to not going to be saving them money. But, if we're estimating that typically it costs $6 a square foot for tile and they buy it for $3, they save themselves $3 a square foot. So a very flexible model, but one that has its pitfalls, right? I mean, there's a lot of danger with using this pricing model for both the client and for the contractor.
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, a lot of times you talk to guys who are custom home builders, or they do these big high dollar jobs that take a long time. They end up in cost plus pretty frequently. And
you almost have to, right?
Yeah, because you're going to have that person who's going to make the marble change halfway through. But you had to have a framework to start. Hey, here's the estimate of what it's going to cost, and build in that contractual language. We know there's going to be a lot of changes along the way. What this does, it does help you. Like the price of lumber goes up, down, windows go up, down. You bake in those costs as you go, and that's going to, cause the price to go up, down as you're going through it. It locks in some profit for you. So it does help. You can almost guarantee you profitable in this model, but you also can have the potential of ballooning your price for your customer if it's not well communicated up front.
Yeah. And one of the other aspects of this where this model really struggles is when you have a lot of overhead. Mm-hmm. It's tough to have, if you're a home builder and you use a lot of subcontractors, the overhead expenses are really mostly a part of the subcontractor. They own the trucks, they own the tools, they own all of the labor burden for the team that they hire. But if you're the general contractor, your overhead's typically a lot lighter. You have office staff, you have people working for you, et cetera, that are part of your overhead, but you can manage that within the margin that you're adding as a cost plus. But if you have a 20, 30% of your project is going to overhead, very, very difficult to build really bill in a cost plus model, because what line item is that going under? Mm-hmm. We're marking everything up by 30% for overhead. It's very difficult to sell that way.
Yeah.
And also, how does that change over time? Like how long the project takes? How do we know what that percentage is? And so to kind of help with that, you're really just taking what is that labor cost, making sure that any person on your team where you're figuring that markup to help cover that overhead expense is a part of your labor markup as well. So what might cost you $30 an hour for paying that person might be $80 an hour, which you're billing to your client to help cover the labor burden, which is benefits, taxes, insurance, et cetera.
Yep.
And then you have really the markup of, well, what does it cost to stay in business? Tools, trucks, et cetera.
Yeah. I think, if you're going cost plus, some of those, there's pros to it. I mean, I think you mentioned some of, going through some of those cons. It's like, it is harder to sell to some customers. To the average customer, they're like, it sounds too fuzzy. They're like, this sounds like, I'm not sure I trust I can sign up for this. I think when you, for guys who are established home builders, maybe they've done a lot of high-end work in the past and they're working with clientele who wants the best of the best. They understand that they've got expensive taste and this is going to cost a lot of money, but they want this. This is like, the dream build, home from a builder they trust. You've got a reputation. it's easier to sell that up front.
Yeah.
If you're in the cost plus model.
And I think you also need to do your due diligence and make sure you have a thorough estimate as a part of a cost plus model as well, because that's how you help with that transparency. This is what we think things will cost based on these assumptions. But at the end of the day, you're going to pay for what you use.
Yeah.
So if it's less, it's less. If it's more, it's more.
Yeah.
But this is what we're thinking it should cost. And here's the variables of, it could cost wildly more if you choose expensive selections.
Yeah. And I think it's where, I think the tips, if you're in a cost plus model, I mean, communication is absolutely critical along the way. Ongoing, frequent communication with clear expectations and deliverables along the way. If you don't have that, that rising price will be a huge dissatisfier for your customer and create some major conflict along the way. Yeah.
And in a routine, sort of a cadence where you're just saying every week, every 2 weeks, whatever that touch point needs to be, of saying we're on budget or we're off budget, and off budget, why and how much.
Yeah. Whereas if you're in a fixed price model, the pressure's on you just to keep it on budget and on time.
Right.
You're assuming all of that risk and responsibility as the contractor, saying, hey, I'm gonna get it done by this price.
Yep.
And I dang well better figure out how to get it done by that price by that time.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there's a lot more security in that fixed price model. But again, the more complex and higher in the job is, the harder it is to really have a fixed price.
Yeah. So. And maybe it would be helpful just to talk about and briefly when these models make sense.
Yeah.
So fixed price, what you're doing. Number one.
Yeah. Always a good thing to start with.
Well, and I don't mean from a standpoint of skill. I'm talking about what are you doing on the project?
Scope standpoint. I know exactly what
Right. With clear scope of work. So you want a client decisive, informed. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be that first guy to the project where the people go, well, I'm not sure what we want. Run. You can't give somebody a fixed price when you don't know what you're doing at that job.
Great point.
You've got to have somebody that's really, we know exactly how things, so you've got plans, you've got specifications, if you need them, everyone's on the same page with what's being done. Mm-hmm. And you can also, all that stuff's nailed down. You can use allowances to help with that, where you're saying, I'm going to allow you $1,000 for the tile, use as much of that or as little of that as you want to. So that can help with fixed price. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to figure out every single line item. So allowances can be really helpful. Then you're talking the time and materials. It's a simple job, but with a kind of an open-ended scope. It's the fence repair. It's the small type of 1, 2, 3, 4 day project, week-long job where it's a manageable complexity and people are okay with sort of a parameter of saying this could take a week, could take 2 days. Mm-hmm. And then you're talking the cost plus is really when there's either a lot of variability, you don't have the scope nailed down at the beginning. You really have a lot of opportunity for things going wildly up, down, and you're saying, well, in order for us to give you a bid on this job, we've got to use this model. Mm-hmm. We haven't opened up the walls in a remodel. We don't know what we're going to run into. This home was built in 1920. Yeah. That kind of scenario. Or it's a new build, but we don't have the selections nailed down. Or the customer saying, we want it done right. We don't care what it costs. It's got to be, to our specifications, kind of a thing. Or there's just so many things to manage as a part of it where it'd be overwhelming for you to try to bid it.
Right.
So I think that's kind of maybe when you could use these different types of pricing models.
Yeah. I think kind of the point is we're getting ready to wrap up here is, if you've only used one of these models and you've never used one of the other two, it would be a good idea to research and do some homework on how to bid in a different model.
There's one other model we didn't talk about, and it's just so I'm being fair to this one. And this is where there's just a unit price model. And that's essentially where subcontractors often use this and say, we charge $3 a square foot for this. And that factors in the material, labor, and everything else. So not to be unfair to the people that use that model, that can work too. Just make sure your overhead's factored in there. Make sure that you have minimums as a part of that too, where you don't show up at your job for 12 square feet, $3 a square foot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, guys know that, how to manage that model well. That's disrespectful to assume that, people wouldn't know to charge a minimum on that one. But, nonetheless, making sure the overhead's a part of that too. It costs you money to get to a job, costs you money to sell jobs. So that can work as well.
Yeah. So I think if you've not used one of these models and maybe you've gotten started, you want to use time and material, or you're using fixed price, but it's burnt you one too many times, and maybe you should be looking into cost plus modeling. Yeah. Or you're trying to do cost plus modeling, but you're having a hard time closing a deal. Maybe it's because you should be using fixed price to bid. And so whichever your margin is, seems like all three of these models are tools in your tool belt that you can deploy at different times depending on the job. And don't limit yourself just to one pricing model.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I think in sort of summary, I think I've used all three. I've had success and failure with all three. Communication, key. Making sure your customer knows how this project's going to go down. We're using this model. Here's why. And being transparent about it.
Yeah. And I think, shameless plug here for ConGenius as well. If you're someone who's only done time materials, or you've struggled, or you've been bit one too many times where you've lost money on a job, for that guy, ConGenius is exactly why we're building it for you. It is to help you get clear estimates, accurately, proposals out the door that are clean, professional, that can help you win jobs faster, save time, make more money, and making sure you get it right with ConGenius. And if you haven't checked it out yet,
do it now.
Yeah, do it now. do it. Yeah, but part of it is too, hey, we built this thing for contractors. We're not just software nerds building software for what we would do. We built it with a contractor in mind to say, how do we help our customers save time, make more money by getting the estimate and the bid right up front as a building block one to giving you a profitable business.
Stemming from our own experience in this realm.
Yeah. Lots of painful losses taken. We take some L's to help you get some dubs. All right. That's a wrap for this episode of the Contractor Commute. We appreciate your time. We'll see you guys in a couple weeks.